Everyone to day 2 of our Zooming in on Change Community and Connection Conference. Today we are joined by Dr. Lexley Nibbs, who's going to be talking to us about advising Black males in 2020 and beyond. Dr. Lexley Nibbs holds a doctorate in higher education administration from Northeastern University in Boston, Massachusetts, and currently serves as the lead academic advisor for Team Natural Science within the College of Art and Sciences at Florida Gulf Coast University. Dr. Nibbs has presented at various NACADA conferences at the national, regional, and international levels. He's very passionate about minority and underserved populations in academic advising, Black males, and the leadership within higher education. Without further ado, please introduce Dr. Nibbs.
Thank you so much, Julie. Appreciate it. Happy Thursday, everyone. Thanks for joining my session, Advising Black Males in 2020 and Beyond. Before I get into the meat of the matter, I just wanted to point out that this presentation was done last year by myself, in addition to 5 other gentlemen. So I wanted to acknowledge them. Dr. Quentin Alexander, who is at George Mason University in Virginia, is presenting right now in a session where at the same time. He was part of that initiative as well. Mark Nelson, who is the incoming chair of NACADA's Inclusion and Engagement Committee. Daryl, who is in charge of First Year Students Initiative. And J.J. Johnson at University of Central Florida, who is part of the conference planning committee for NACADA, and we have Bill Johnson at University of North Carolina, Greensboro. So we teamed up last year and did this initiative after a lot of things had happened last year, and we felt that it was important for us to at least add our voice to the ongoing conversation, but do it from an advising perspective for Black males. So Black males coming onto college campuses realize that they have advocates, and when they see people look like themselves, they'll feel a little bit more accepting and feel a sense of belongingness. So I just wanted to put that plug right there before I go any further into the presentation itself. So the webinar was done by us October last year. We also have an article in Academic Advising Today, AAT, which you can access, has lots of resources, but this presentation lends itself to an hour or less, probably about 45 minutes. So there's not a lot of things that I can cover, but I did my best in trying to come up with some of the strategies that I wanted to impart to you as you navigate the advising field and discussing some of these things when you have a Black male who walk into your office, or you have to call them on the telephone, do what's called a tele-advising or a teleconferencing session, that you'll know how to reach out to them. Because folks, believe it or not, the advising has to be different. We can't be the same or use the same strategy we use for certain students and use that one size fit approach. It's not going to work for us, and we're going to lose these students. So for me, when I see a Black male on my campus, when he comes in to see me, I am excited. I welcome that person because I want them to come back and see me. I want them to feel that sense of belongingness and that the space is welcoming and they won't be intimidated to come back into that particular space. All right, so without further ado, Julie, you can go to the next slide for me, please. So today's learning objective, they're very basic. Just understand how to advise Black males. Apply the concept learned today in your advising practice. Analyze your position in higher education as it relates to diversity, equity, and inclusion. So it's a self-reflection, and evaluate and self-reflect to identify your own biases. A lot of times we have these biases and they're kind of hidden. And a lot of time they come to the surface sometimes when we're actually working with those students or when we're talking to our colleagues. So these are just some of the learning objectives I want you to walk away with from this presentation. Next slide, Julie. All right, so today's agenda, we're going to talk about Black males and who's included. And that may seem a little bit concerning when I say who's included, because as I mentioned before, we can't use the same measuring stick for everybody else. We can't use that one size fit approach. It doesn't necessarily work. We're going to look at some terminologies, the microaggressions, the racial battle fatigue, Henry Zim, Imposter syndrome, which is a lot what our Black males suffer when they come into these higher education spaces. And I'm going to be talking about some strategies that you can employ and use in your advising practices. Next slide, Julie. All right, so when we talk about Blackness, what do we mean when we talk about being Black? And that's a terminology that we tend to use. Someone asked us when we did this, why didn't you say African American? It's a little bit more appropriate. No, it is not. Because if you do understand the context when it comes to cultural heritage and background or ethnicity, when you talk about Black, it covers folks who are dark skinned, coming from sub-Saharan African descendants. And it doesn't necessarily, it covers everybody. So there's no distinction between who's African American, who's Afro-Caribbean, who's Afro-Asian, Afro-Latino. We talk about Black, it encompasses all those folks. So that is what we're using the terminology to say Black. Because a lot of times when I talk about Black, I tell people a lot of times that there are folks from the Caribbean, where I am from in Jamaica, and you cannot refer to them as African American because they don't see themselves as that. People refer to them as Afro-Caribbean, but the proper terminology would be Black, right? So the use of the term is what we're going to employ through this is Black. So when I say it's not used in a derogatory or disrespectful tone. What does it mean in relation to identity? It simply means Black. I'm a person of color. I identify as such and want to be recognized and classified as such. The social and political factors of the term has been quite misleading across a large spectrum. We started off with Black, then we became African American, then we now become BIPOC, Black and Indigenous persons of color, which I particularly still have a problem with because I don't want to be identified as what people refer to as a person of color. I want to be seen as someone who is Black. Next slide, Julie. Okay, so when I just jump ahead of myself in talking about the categorization of Black males, so we talk about African, African American, African Caribbean, and Black Africans, because a lot of times you'll have students on your campus and they may have come from a different part, different country, and you don't know their cultural heritage or their background, but you keep referring to them that African-American student. And sometimes that can be deemed and taken out of context. So in order for you, what I'm saying, in your safe spaces, it's okay to use the terminology Black because it's politically correct and no one has to turn around and say, look, I'm not from here and give you that old spiel. So if you say Black, it is okay. Next slide, Julie, I'm sorry. So I wanted to put this slide because how the media portrays Black males, and this is what we see, and I'm sure a lot of who are on the presentation today can affiliate and see this is what the media portrays us. They portray us rappers, sports personnel, movie star, and in sport, and a lot of times that's not where we're from. I have a friend who's about 6'6", and every time he walks into a space, he's asked, are you on the basketball team? He's in higher education. This man has not played any basketball a day in his life, right? And sometimes you may not see these as a little bit of microaggression, but they are, because you are looking at someone and looking at their height and you're affiliating it with something immediately. They must play sport. They're on the basketball team. I have friends sometimes who walk into a higher education setting, they're in a classroom, and the professor will come up and said, okay, which are you a student athlete? What sport you playing? They don't play sport. They're just tall. They're just playing sport on the campus. So sometimes that can be a little bit misleading. And that is how the media portrays us. They don't portray us as sometimes the ones who are in higher education who have done their scholarly work and have done lots of presentation and written books and articles. We don't see that a lot. This is what we see. So sometimes we have to break that barrier down to let them know that there are some of us in higher education who have deserved our space, who have terminal degrees, and we have walked that line. We have gone through the dissertation crucifix, we have published articles and so forth, but you don't see a lot of that. This is what you see in the media and how we are portrayed. We're portrayed as tough. We're portrayed as we could be 5'8". We are portrayed as 6 foot, and we are sometimes dangerous. That's not what we are. So I just wanted to put that plug in there. Next slide, Julie. All right, so we're going to look at the concept of race as a construct, and race is defined as a category or group of people having hereditary traits that sets them apart. The sociologists and other social scientists believe that race is a socially constructed concept. It is an idea that was created in society to justify inequality. And what does that mean? It sounds like a lot of work, but these are not my words. These are by Sills in 2010. Just think about when you go to complete an application form. And when you check the box, if you're doing it electronically and you check that box online, it opens up this whole drop-down arrow. And then you have to find something that you affiliate with that kind of tells you where you are, fit you into that bubble. If you are filling that out, sometimes it is a little bit of a mystery, because some people stop and they're like, I don't see anything here that matches me. And they'll just check others. Right. So I want you to understand that this was advocated by the sociologists, that society sometimes do that to justify inequality. Next slide, Julie. So I did talk about microaggression at the onset, and these are some of them that we face, and especially the Black male population. I did talk about a few of those before in higher education, and you can see some on the screen. So where are you really from? And sometimes a lot of us in our advising practices don't know that. Sometimes that's a little bit disrespectful when you turn to someone, and you probably could frame it a little better. So where are you really from? Just talk to the person. They said, hey, you know, I'm reading this, and I said, would you like to tell me a little bit more about yourself and so forth? And that is a little bit more welcoming conversation to get that individual to open. What are you? People ask that question sometimes, and you're like taken out of, you're like looking at them like, what do you mean, what am I? And that's going to come with some defense mechanism that's put in place. Or for example, you speak English so well. I have friends who get that a lot because they're Black. And when they speak, people ask them that question, well, you speak so well for a Black person. And that sometimes is a little disrespectful. It's not a compliment by any chance at all. It is not. It's a little bit disrespectful, because who's to say that we have to speak a particular way for us to be deemed and accepted into those spaces? And of course, I'm sure you've heard this before. Microaggressions are like little mosquitoes. They bite, they hurt. And you don't necessarily feel the long-term effects until after, when a mosquito bites you, you'll just scratch a little bit. But afterwards, you have this red swelling that pops up, and you might have to get an anti-itch to put on it to reduce that swelling. That is how the microaggression is, because immediately when it's committed against that individual, they don't know. It's like talking about it afterwards. And I'm sure a lot of you have been in a situation where you've been in spaces and someone said something, but you didn't react. And then I'll be like, oh man, that was a microaggression. I didn't know what it was at that time. So I want you to think outside the box at it. That's how microaggression comes across sometimes. Next slide, Julie, please. Again, that's a clear demonstration right there that talks about what I just mentioned about the microaggression. Yeah, if you look at the caption, I still have malaria from the last time someone said something stupid but well-intentioned to me. That is how the microaggression, they hit you so hard, it hurts. So what I want to impart to you is, in your advising practice, be mindful of the things that comes out of your mouth immediately. You might want to think about certain things before you open your mouth sometimes to speak, especially as it relates to the Black male population. We get hurt easily. All right, next slide, Julie. Thank you. So I did talk about microaggression, and what I wanted to talk about, there are 4 types of them. Some theorists or some of authors will attribute or allocate that there are only 3, but there are 4 of them that are out there. Micro insult, that's the first one. And I give you an example, telling a Black student that they speak good English. So the example I gave you before, that was a micro insult as a compliment. The next one is micro invalidation, when a white person tells the person of color that racism doesn't exist. And we are living in this, what I say, I'm not gonna say it's very, it's tough times. A lot of sensitive information gets people upset a lot of times. So that happens. So if you're in an advising space and then you tell a student, oh, you know, you're racist, there's no such thing as racism, that is a micro invalidation. You're trying to invalidate something that's not necessarily true. It is there. Racism does exist. It is taught. It's learned. So micro assault, referring to someone as colored or oriental. I did refer to that before. So this is why I do not take lightly to the concept of being called that colored boy or that colored man. It's disrespectful. It's an assault to us. Or for example, members of the Asian American and Pacific Islander, you refer to them as oriental. That's another one outside. That's a bit of a micro assault. And the final one is micro exclusion. When you exclude people who are Black from conversation and you make them feel like they do not belong. If they're outside, your conversations are kept in little group and so forth. And when you do those things, you don't necessarily, you're leaving them out of the equation. You're in your little circles, your little cliques, and they're standing aside and just watching you. So those sometimes can be very hard and harsh on Black males and Black individuals. Next slide, Julie. So some terminologies, we continue with those. Racial battle fatigue. And a lot of folks may not believe this. I talked to a friend of mine who said there's no such thing. There is. It is called racial battle fatigue after facing so much microaggression and in different forms and variations and so many different racial issues coming at you. That can lead to what we call racial battle fatigue. And people of Black folks have felt this, and they are physical and psychological stress that come from being immersed in chronically racist environment. So if you're in an environment and people keep coming at you every day, it tends to wear you down. You get fatigued, you get disinterested, you don't want to go into those spaces, you don't want to come to work, you try to stay home and avoid people, right? So folks, believe it, it is real and it is there. You can check out Smith, Allen, and Danley in 2007, who did a very good job of explaining what does that entail. It gets a little deeper than what I'm telling you, but I won't go too much into that. Next slide, Julie. So I'm sure if you're looking at this and you see that picture, that's a very, very disturbing picture. And if you saw the movie Get Out, that is what it looks like in reality, racial battle fatigue. I won't necessarily get into the whole descriptor of the movie, but I thought the picture that speaks 1,000 words in telling you what Black males feel sometimes on our college campuses when they're excluded, when the microaggressions come against them, and when they're up to the point of getting racial battle fatigue. This is what it looks like: the red eyes, the tears, the facial expression. That is just a clear picture of what that represents. All right, and then we also have something called Henry Zim, and you might wonder, what the heck am I talking about? What is this? It is real. This is another one, folks, and this is strong behavioral predisposition to cope actively with psychosocial and environmental stresses. Those are the stresses of life that keeps coming at you. They come at Black males on college campuses so much that they don't even want to come into the spaces. They're absent from their classes. They don't want to talk to financial aid personnel. They want to come to see their advisors and so forth. So that is another one that's real. And if you don't believe me, you can research this when you are done. There's a great article by Abner and Allison in 2011 that talks about this, and it is real. And the big one, which is the most obvious, is the imposter syndrome. A lot of Black males on college campuses today, if you ask them, they do not feel that sense of belonging. They do not feel that they are worthy to be in such spaces because of certain, it's the ideologies of higher education that are held by what I call bureaucracy and red tape. A lot of times our Black males come to campus, they just run to their classes and they're back out. A lot of them don't necessarily get to socialize or go to what we call office hours. They stay away from those because they view them as, this is where I'm going to go and be another microaggression or being discriminated against. When I go there, I've had friends who told me before, students who have mentored, when they go to office hours, they're told, why are you here? And I go, why is the professor saying that when they have office hours? And they're like, oh, I've never seen someone of your type come to office hours. Those again are very, very disrespectful. The tone, but again, we know those are faculty, not necessarily academic advisors who do that sometimes. So of course, my imposter syndrome, it refers to an individual who doubts their own skills, abilities, successes, and overall capabilities in their life. Case in point, I'll give you an example. We had a student who took a student who I mentored. He's a biology major. He took a bio quiz and he went to pick up his paper from the faculty, and the faculty just handed him a paper that showed that the person only earned a 30 with a face crying tears. He looked at the paper and he told the professor, he said, this is not my paper. And the professor said, what do you mean? This is yours. He's like, no, that's not my name. You gave me someone else's paper. When in fact, his paper was someone who got a 95 on that quiz, but the professor just couldn't believe. He just handed him a paper with a tear face, with a tear streaming down. And we have to be conscious and be cautious of those things sometimes when we stereotype and put people into bubble based on our expectation and those what I call those biases that we hold within ourselves. So we have to be mindful. So I've gone through the terminology of racial battle fatigue. We've talked about Henry Zim, and we talk about microaggression. We talk about imposter syndrome. Those are all a lot of issues that you have, terminologies that you have to be aware of. But how do you navigate that? How do you get around these things? And I'm going to be talking to you about some of the strategies that you can employ when you have a Black individual come into your spaces, Black male, not necessarily Black female, a Black male on your college campuses and in your advising space. So I want to talk to you a little bit about advising Black males. And a lot of times when we, a lot of times when we talk about advising Black males, I want you to understand that the best way of doing this, it's not necessarily the intrusive advising, as a lot of people say. That, I've heard some of my colleagues talk about intrusive advising is best for Black males and also developmental because that's what they need. But there's something called holistic advising. And if you look, I showed you a picture right there, and it shows a friendly advisor sitting with a young man, and they're both smiling. The lady's smiling, and the young man is looking at her with an aura of interest, right? One of the things you want to do within that session when you meet with a Black male, you could ask one question, and I highly urge you to do this. Is there anything I should know about you that would prevent successful completion of the program? I kid you not, if you ask that one question, that student is going to open up to you in so many ways. Please do not use a how's it going? What can I do for you today? It's not going to work for this population of students at all, but I'm going to ask you to use this question. Again, I'll repeat it. Is there anything I should know about you that would prevent you from successful completion of the program? Asking this simple question is also personally meaningful. It enables you to connect with the student and to gain their trust while also helping to keep them aligned with their plan of studies. That's all we're asking for. Next slide, Julie, please. So the next slide talks about some of the strategies. What I have right there is what I call an acronym. And if you look at it, it says, believe they can achieve. That's the first thing you have to realize, that when a Black young man come in front of you, always keep an open mind. Get rid of all those preconceived ideas and the conversation that you hear about them. And I want you to think positive and believe that they can achieve. And in your conversation, I want you to pay attention to the acronym RAISE. Reflect on others' body language. Ask about observation of other people in groups. Inquire about positive, negative feedback from others related to your task performance. Speak about successful experience and engage in probing question, right? This is how you probably want to start. And even if you know them before and they're coming into your spaces, what they do is to put you in a position to learn more about them. And when they walk into your spaces, that those conversations would somewhat be easier for you, instead of pretending, oh, here's another Black guy again. How am I going to do this? I don't even know how to relate to people of this kind. Just be kind about things. And that's what I always encourage advisors. It's not a lot. You are already doing it. You just need to tweak a few of the things that you're doing in order to have a better representation and a better result in that advising experience. Next slide, Julie, please. All right, so the next one is finding that voice. And we talk about that voice, and a lot of you may question, what is that voice? What am I referring to? To help our Black male students find what I call self-efficacy, we need to help raise your beliefs that they can be successful in our advising session. We should have discussion reflecting on the perceived body language of others, and that is related to what I spoke about before. But the voices, they need to have an outlet to use the power of their voice without repercussion to advocate for what they need to be successful. This is where you as an academic advising professional matter. In our session, we should be assisting our Black males understand their institutional and student rights, determine and communicate their needs, and how to support and share their arguments and frustration through facts. We should help them plan strategies and how to gather and gain support from the university community members when needed. Additionally, we should also assist them how to express and assert themselves calmly and clearly while being firm and persistent. Now, I'm going to put a pause here, a plug here, and I'm going to talk about this one I'm saying. Now, folks, you have to realize that when it comes to this part, advising Black men, it can be tough sometimes. One, if we raise our voices, we're deemed as a threat. I've had students, myself, I tell you about my college experience when I was in college, undergrad, I was taking a calculus course, and I got a grade, and I asked my professor, and I just walk up to her and a friend of mine, we both studied, and we just went to talk to her. And next thing I know, the next day I get an email that says I need to meet with the dean, and I went to the dean's office. I was not, like a threat or anything. I was a student body president. So she requested me to come to her office, and I went to her, and she said, what happened in your class yesterday? And I said, I'm not sure what you're referring to. And she said, well, you can't be that class anymore. And I said, what happened? She said, well, the lady who teaches the class said you and that other individual, you're both a threat, and she wants you out, or she's going to have to cancel the class. And she said, be clear with me and tell me what happened. I said, all I did was ask her about my grade. She said, you didn't threaten her. I said, no, I did not. I said, well, she felt threatened, and she's forcing, and her husband is planning to sue the university right now. So you have to get out of that course. So I was forcefully removed from my calculus class that semester and placed into another class because I could not go in the other class. This was a summer course. I had to take the class in the fall because the other professor would not take us into that class, all because one person felt that two of us were Black male, and we walk up to her and question her, and she felt cornered, and she felt that we were a threat. So we were removed from that course. So that's just a similar experience. And I'm saying, as far as the voice is related, we have to make sure that we measure our voices when we talk. At my institution, sometimes I have a title. People sometimes refer to me as the aggressive Black man, ABM. That's the title I get. I'm not aggressive. I'm the nicest guy, But because I talk a lot with my hand and I just gesticulate, people view that as a threat sometimes and feel that I'm into their faces. So a lot of times we have to get outside that realm, help the Black male student find their voices. And when we walk into those spaces, it's not about our loudness. Sometimes we get so hurt that it comes out in such a way that it's a threat, and we're deemed as a threat immediately. People start locking their doors, and people start walking away because they don't want to be a part of that. And that's not necessarily true. It doesn't necessarily hold true for us, but we are learning. But it's a process. The Black young man that I mentor, one of the things I try to tell them is just to make sure that you maintain that level of consciousness with your voice. Do not project too much, but speak, and speak calmly, because sometimes our voices are a threat, and you have to be mindful of that. Next slide, Julie. So building what I call positive relationship building. Remember again, relationship building, the first impression matters. When a student walks into your office on the first day, you have to look at yourself as an academic advisor. You are in a position of power. You are looking at people's grade. You are forming judgment opinions immediately. So that comes with a lot of burden when these young men walk into your spaces. You're already looking at your transcript, you're forming this idea, you're forming this opinion. And when you meet with them, it doesn't necessarily go well. So what I want to impart to you is the first time you're meeting with those students, please look at your transcript and do not form any judgment or any opinion. Just speak to them as a normal person. Believe me, be sincere, build rapport. Remember, you're trying to gain trust. Trust is important. I say that a lot to academic advisors. If a student, the first time they meet you and they didn't feel too comfortable with you, that trust is lost. They're not going to come back and see you, okay? Use active listening techniques. Listen, a lot of times we are formulating responses in our head immediately, and we need to listen sometimes and let them talk. But when it gets a little too deep, that is when you step in. But give them a little go ahead sometime to guide that conversation. But if it goes a little too far, that's when you step in as the academic advisor. Be sympathetic and use patience. A lot of them don't understand. So here's what I'm going to tell you. Those institutional lingo that you use, where you use abbreviations and places, they don't know what you're talking about. You're not talking to your colleagues. So you might want to change that rhetoric and start just talking normal to people. We have here at our institution, the Office of the Registrar. And now they've changed their name and they call themselves Office of Records and Registration. So I fell victim to that in telling one of my students. He goes, Dr. Nate, what are you talking about? I said, oh, it's a registrar's office. He said, so why didn't you just say that? And that is how sometimes things can get out of context. So those institutional lingo, please be mindful of them. We have a lot of them here at our institution. I'm sure you have them at your institution. People will send students, oh, you have to go to the CAA. What is the CAA? It's the Center for Academic Achievement, but that's just how we speak in Irish. But we have to change that dialogue when we talk to these students. Make sure that you follow through and follow up with them. If you send them to financial aid about something, make sure that you are, did you go? How did it turn out? That shows that you have interest and you're following up with the student. Next slide, Julie, please. So I did talk about the finding and using their voices. Advisors should help Black males. You should help them to research how to find information and resources. It is important. If you feel it's a little bit too much for you, it shouldn't be, because I'm going to say this, and I don't mean this in a bad way. If you signed up for the job as an academic advisor, you have to remember that you're guided by what's called the CAS standards. It talks about diversity, equity, right? And that a lot of what's implemented in that CAS standard, that you are following that as your guide when you meet with these students. So if I'm saying to you, research how to find information and resources, it shouldn't be too much. It should be something that you're willing to do because that's the job that you sign up for. Seek additional individual mentors and guidance and advice. A lot of times I have some of the advisors who are women, and they come to me and they say, oh, I have this Black student, and do you know of any resources? Because here at my university, I'm heavily involved where I work with the marginalized and underserved student, the underrepresented population. So I'm an advisor for two different registered students organization. I'm the advisor for the Minority Association of Pre-Medical Students. I'm also the faculty advisor for the Caribbean Students Association. So a lot of times the advisors will make reference and send them to come to meet with me, and I can help them, because sometimes it's hard. I know it is difficult, and if you're not necessarily used to working with this population of student, it takes a little bit of training sometimes. But I always say to the advisors, look, you've done a wonderful job at this. I never put people down, but here's why. I want you to tweak a little bit to what you're doing and do this. So they talk to me sometime. I'm going to meet with the student. Do you have any tips for me? And I'm wonderful. I jump in and I said, hey, it's about trust. So be kind, be nice. It's easy to be, it's just be nice and you'll get through to them. That's all it is. And it works. A lot of them will come back and say, oh, that was nice. I was just being myself. I talked to them and they, I helped them and so forth. So they're reporting back to me, right? So, and those are some of the things I want to say. Develop self-determination. That's another one as well too. It can be tough sometimes, but we have to sometimes throw the charge at them that they have to develop that. I tell my students a lot of time, you have to take responsibility for your learning. This is your degree. You have to hone it. If you don't hone it, there's not a lot. I'm not going to help you as much as possible, but you need to do your part as well. Thank you, Julie. Next slide. All right. So the other part is advise to build resilience. Demonstrate interest in the student. That's the first thing I want to say. Don't just see them as a number. See them as an individual who came into you, that you are the expert and they're here to gain that, get some information from you as far as their progress is concerned towards degree completion. I say this a lot. When I'm talking to students, I am not typing. I know some advice like to type notes. I don't type. I make sure that they have my undivided attention within that 30-minute segment, right? I am not on my computer unless it's something relating to the student. I'm looking at my computer. If a phone calls come between my appointment, I don't necessarily, I'll look gently. If it's not the Associate Vice President of University Advising Services, who's like my boss, I am not touching that. But if it's I am not going to answer. That can wait, because once you take the time and you pick that phone up, hey, it's gone. I can tell you a lot of times you break what was that dialogue, and it's very hard. You come back in that, where were we? And they're probably looking at you. Are you kidding? You mean where were we? We're talking about something. You know what? It's okay. I'll leave that. And that happens a lot of times. So please, I would highly encourage you, make sure that you're demonstrating interest in the student. See them as someone who's worthy. Give them your undivided attention and be real. Be kind. Make sure you're using eye contact. Look at them. I don't mean necessarily to focus your eyes on them for the entire time, but make sure you're making and you're nodding and you're understanding that what's happening right there. Next slide, Julie. So I want to encourage you again, seize the opportunity to teach when the moment presents itself. Academic advising is teaching. Academic advising is teaching. I do not care what the teaching faculty says. There is an article out there that talks about advising is teaching, and it's by Mark Lowenstein, and you might want to get a hold of that, where it talks about what we do in our profession and that we teach. Because what we do, we teach students about the curriculum. We teach them how to take responsibility for their education. We teach them how to be punctual, how to come to an advising session, how to craft an email, how to talk to a faculty, that's what we do. So we're teaching them. So we have to remember that it's always a teachable moment for us, and it's also a learning opportunity in itself. Next slide, Julie. Charge the student to evaluate difficult issues with available resources. A lot of times, and I'll tell you what this one is all about. I am not afraid to tell my students sometimes when they tell me things and they're like, things are not going right. And sometimes I don't necessarily prod, I let students talk, because some advisors seem to think, intrusive advising, where they keep prodding and you keep picking at people. I know that, as for me as a Black person, I don't do that. So what I do is I let students know. I always use the line, if you'd like to talk about something, I'm here for you. And that just opens the window, because for me, it's welcoming and I'm opening myself to that dialogue, but I don't prod to find out what's going on. I leave them to talk about it. So when I say charge the student to evaluate a difficult issue with available resources, a lot of times, we have at our institution what's called counseling and psychological services. And I had a student who was in a predicament last year. And he had 3 sessions with me. And I mean, the 3 sessions were like within the same week. So for me, there's something going on. I mean, because we just met on Monday, we're meeting again on Wednesday, and then we're meeting again on Friday. Is there something you want to talk to me about? And all it was, folks, he wanted to talk to someone, a counselor, but talking to his friends, it's like, you're going to talk to a shrink. That happened. So I said to him, okay, but if you need to talk with someone, we have resources on our campus. And he said to me, okay, where is it? And I said, it's right. I point and I showed it in the building. I said, do you need me to walk with you there? And he said, thank you, Dr. Nibbs, that would help. And that's all it took, right? So sometimes, folks, there are resources available on your campus, and sometimes they will not necessarily access it. I know that there's at our institution, we have what we call supplemental instruction. That was the terminology I was looking for. But at the same time, it's tutoring services. And a lot of Black males don't go to those, they don't go into those spaces. And I have to tell my students a lot of time, go. It is free. It's not going to cost you a dime. It's part of your tuition. Go. Right? So sometimes that has to come with me a little bit forward because they will not use the resources. And a lot of times I say to them, hey, you have all these resources here, right? Stop going to pay someone $45 an hour to teach you chemistry, right? You can go here, you have people who are doing this, it's free. Go and utilize the services. So sometimes you have to promote those resources, let them know. And sometimes, I kid you not, if it has to deal with the counseling and the psychological services, you as an advisor, it will make a difference if you go to support your student. You don't have to stay, but just walk them there and just walk away, right? I've had students who have issues with faculty. They don't know how to go and talk about something. And I go and I said, do you need me to go with you? And I've done that. I had a student last semester who was late for an exam. I mean, extremely late. And she came to me, tears streaming down her face. Her car broke down. And she came to see me, and I walk out of here. I took her right to the building. I knock on the door of the faculty and I said, Dr. So-and-so, she's my student advisor. She said, come on in. I'll let you give you a few minutes more than the other. That worked. That makes a difference. You know how happy that student was? So those are the things sometimes that we have to make sure that we are pushing and those things. Now, the other part of the side is fear is still meaning forget everything and run or face everything and rise. The choice is yours. Now, I am not going to do the one at the top. I'm going to go the latter one, face everything and rise, because that's what it is all about. They have to face that and they have to rise from that. So we have to always remember that when we see the acronym FAIR, we want to stick with the second part, face everything and rise, because if you forget everything and run, then that's it, you've lost that student. Next slide, Julie. Hold the student accountable for their own goals. You have to do that. Not because you're Black, you're going to sit there and be all this soppy. No, you don't. You have to hold them. It's their education. If you tell them to take Calculus 1 and they decide that I'm not going to do that, I'm going to supplement that, and they know that they're in the sciences and that's a course to move into the next sequence. And if they go and and a lot of times as advisor, we say to a student, take this course, they don't listen to it. They'll walk out of our office with what we tell them, but they're not going to do that because they go there, they listen to their friends and they change their mind, right? So when you make sure that in your notes, you hold them accountable, take good advising notes, write them down. I told the student that they should have taken Calculus 1 this semester in order to move into Calc 2 the next semester. That is where you're holding them accountable with your notes, because that's what you told them to do and they didn't. So when it comes to next year and they can't move further into the major, make progress, this is why you hold them accountable, because your notes tell a story. So make sure that you're writing good advising notes and hold them accountable. Don't worry about having the right words, worry about having the right heart. And that's a powerful phrase right there, powerful code. Always make sure that you don't have to, and I use this loosely here at my institution. I tell people, you don't have to worry about it. Don't do that. Just it's a trust. It's a confidence, make sure that they get the right information before they walk out of it. You don't have to have the right word. You don't have to ask me, how do I talk to this person? Hey, yo, no, don't do that. Just make sure that you're being yourself and you're being a person, right? Treat them as you want to be treated. Next slide, Julie. So what I want to say, I put this slide in because a lot of times it's the microaggressions again. It's a imposter syndrome, it's a John Henry Zim, and it's a racial battle fatigue. But I wanted to put this here as an encouraging slide to say, next time you see a tall Black boy, tell him he looks like an entrepreneur, an attorney, an influencer, an analysis, an accountant, a CEO, and not just a ball player. Black boys can excel at all things and not just sport, right? So I want to leave you with that perspective because I want you to keep that in mind, that when you see these young Black males come into your institution, there's a lot that they can do. And there's a lot, they have goals, they have aspiration, they have dreams like anybody else. They can do that, but they sometimes need a little bit of confidence. They need someone to believe in them. They need someone to push them, to prod them, to encourage them. This is where you as an advisor play that central and important role in helping them to find that voice and believe in themselves, right? So please, if you have a pic camera phone, just go ahead, take a picture of that and keep that, because that's going to make a difference with the persons who walk into your spaces in the upcoming fall 2021 semester. Or if you're not doing face-to-face advising, like we don't know what we're doing here at our institution coming up because of the new variant of this virus, but we were doing what's called tele-advising, and we were doing teleconferencing via Zoom and Microsoft Teams. But this is going to help you if you keep that, maybe in the future, maybe in spring of 2022 when they start coming into the spaces again. Always just open your phone and look at that, and always remember, if you're going to meet with the student, think about that, what we just said, because not all of us are about sport. We didn't get admitted to the institution because of our athletic prowess. We got in because of our educational credentials or test scores. And again, we're worthy to be at the institution because we applied, we got it. We just need to find that sense of belonging. And this is where the advisor plays an important role. Next slide, Julie. Questions, and I have my references and my social media. So if you do have questions, Julie, you can open it up, and I'm pretty open to answering questions.
Yeah, if you guys have any questions, please feel free to throw them in the chat. We didn't have any that came in during the presentation, so
okay.
If anyone has any. Raphael said, just a comment regarding positive relationship building, I think is also important to practice critical self-reflection to distract biases and beliefs we were socialized into.
That's a great point. Excellent point, because it is important, because we have to remember, and that's why I say at the front, the onset with a learning objective, when we talk about self-reflection, that is going to be critical when you are meeting, because you have to examine yourself first, right? Because if you don't look at yourself, how are you going to be this advocate for this student when you have all these preconceived notions already forming part of your judgment, and you're forming these things, and it's not right. So yes, great point, Raphael. I appreciate that. Can you elaborate more on this part of raising, inquire about positive, negative feedback from others related to task performance? So some examples, so I talked a little bit about that. So a lot of times, I'm not sure how you do it at your institution, but if I'm meeting, now we're going, if you're a caseload advisor, it means you're continually seeing the same kind of students or a few new students. So sometimes what I'll do is I go to my colleague, if I've never met with a student before, we just moved to caseload advising this spring semester. And I said, hey, what can you tell me about the student? And, you know, sometimes it starts off a little bit rocky. Oh, well, they're taking this course for the third time. I'm not sure how successful they're going to be. Their major is biology. There's no med school. It's already start coming with a bunch of negative. I said, okay, have you asked the student if there is, for example, a plan A, a plan B, or example, a plan C? And sometimes the advisor, no, I never asked. And I said, okay, well, that gives me my basis. So when I go into that conversation with that student, and I'll give you a perfect example. I had a student here who has been at this institution. I became an academic advisor in 2013. The student has been here from 2009, graduated in 2020, 11 years. When I met with the student, first, the major was chemistry. Very, very tough major. We have a Bachelor of Science in Chemistry program in our institution, requires Calc 1, Calc 2, Calc 3. Does not use college physics, it uses general physics, which is a calc-based physics. That was the program the young man was in. My conversation with him is actually working with an advisor, white female, and when I met with him, before I met with him, I actually went to her and I asked her, and she said, "Well, he needs to change his major and so forth." So when I met with him, I said, "Hey, are there any thoughts about changing the major?" And he said, "Oh, I've never thought about it." I said, "Well, let's look at a few things, right?" And we look at it, and I said, "How about if chemistry is not working for you? I know you've already gone through Chem 1, Chem 2. You had a little bit of history with orgo. Let's move into and see what a biology major will make for you." And we kind of explored that a little bit. So he decided to change the major to BS biology, and I started working with him and so forth. Run into some more obstacle because of it wasn't anything to do with the coursework. It was more from a financial perspective. Just didn't have the tuition to pay for the courses and so forth. But let me not digress too much into the argument. What I want to say is sometimes it's worth it to follow up if you have someone was meet with a student previously and just to hear, but the negativity that comes with it, you can go back to your colleague and say, "Hey, I work with this student and it wasn't the same. I got a different result." But what I usually get from people is because my colleagues sometimes, because you're Black and you can affiliate. No, it's not. I am being a person. Yes, my physical presence speak. But sometimes what I want to say to you is do the follow-up. Sometimes you might learn something from that if you haven't met with that student before. Sometimes for me also what I do, all our students have a financial aid officer. They have to see their financial aid officer. I even revert to calling the financial aid officer sometimes just to get some background perspective on what's going on. If the student is coming to our Center for Academic Achievement, I call there sometimes just to get a background because I don't see those folks' notes. I only see some of the advising notes, which is sometimes pretty bland, doesn't tell me much. Look at check student schedule, enrolled in degree applicable courses, that's it. Those are the notes that I have to go by. So when I talk about that piece, that's what I'm saying. Just go back to someone, and if you haven't met with this, if the student has not met with anybody before, now is your chance to show how good you are at what you do by being that person, being that advocate, and being that voice for that student to help them navigate to that particular degree program.
We have a couple more questions that came in. So the next one, some of our students are coming from other universities and didn't always have the best experiences. What are some good ways to help build up their confidence as an advisor when working with Black males related to their academics and abilities?
I can tell you the first one. Tell them, hey, you're in a new place. This is your opportunity. You have a perfect 4.0 GPA to start. Are we going to keep it? Or are we going to lose it? That sometimes I use it like they laugh. They're like, I never thought about it like that. Yeah, you're in a new place now. So you have a new institutional GPA, right? You will have a transfer GPA because those grades are coming from elsewhere. But now is your chance to tell them the positive. This is your opportunity now. You're starting off on a brand new site. You can keep a 4.0 GPA. And that's my magic word that I use to them all the time because nobody even told them that. I have students sometimes who, when they were at the previous institution, no one even talked to them about some of the dynamics of the coursework or getting a minor. I had a student one time, a bio major who has done all the work, finished Chem 1, finished Chem 2, Orgo 1, Orgo 2. And I said, has anybody ever talked to you about a minor? He said, no. I said, you can get a minor. He's like, really? That man jumped up in my office and he goes, thank you, man. Nobody ever told me that. And I've come into this office so many times. And then I look at the name of who saw the student and I go, and I'm like, I'm not going to sit here silent. I'm going to ask my colleague. And I went over and I said, have you ever talked to the student about a minor? She goes, no, I just didn't get into that. I was focusing more on the coursework. And that's understandable. I say, well, I told him today he could get a minor and he was very, very excited. And she goes, I just didn't focus on that. But sometimes it makes a difference. So always remember, that's a great one. Tell them they're starting off on a brand new thing and just use the positives. The positives will help you and that will gain their trust and their confidence.
I absolutely love that. That's a fantastic perspective. Our next question is about advising as a teaching philosophy. So in your opinion and experience, do you see this philosophy and approach taking a backseat to more equity and social justice focused approach in light of the fact that advising as teaching is more of a comment on our privilege, our powers as advisors and not on the profession?
Yeah, it's definitely getting there, and that's a great question. I just finished writing my PDP, my professional development thing, and one of the things I talk about in there, I had to, I'm sorry, it was my APDR, and that is moving towards my promotion. And one of the things I did mention was advising is teaching, and I talk about it as part of my teaching philosophy. But you're right about that. Advising has gotten to the realm now. There's a lot of things. We are at our institution. I'm sitting on a committee now to draft. We've never had this in our advising unit, a diversity and inclusive statement. I just sat on NACADA with a group of people and wrote for NACADA, or we've just revised our diversity statement with an inclusive statement as well. There's a lot of effort being directed on that about equity and social justice. And it is important, and it stems from the fact of all the things that happened from last year. The whole dialogue and the rhetoric has been changed tremendously. We are not necessarily trying to offend anyone. The advisors on my team, I tell them a lot of times, make sure that you're using that part in banner to see if the student has what's called another name. I fell victim to that. I didn't do my background work. I had a student, and I can say it freely because nobody's here. The name was in the system as, when I put the transcript, said Elizabeth. And I called the student that, and she never looked at me. And I go, and then she turned to me and she said, I have another name. And I said, I was so embarrassed. And I go, I can't believe I fell victim to this. And I had to apologize. And I said, well, I'm so sorry. I said, can you talk to me about it? She said, yeah, I'd like to be called Charlie. That turned into something. And we had an interesting discussion because I never knew some of the things that she went into, and she told me about a transformation she's going through and so forth. So some of the times we have to be mindful of those social justice efforts that are directed, or student, for example. What I say to students a lot of times is, I do not care what bathroom you use, as long as you wash your hands, we're okay. Right? I don't care. We're not supposed to be going into those territories. But you're right about that with the teaching and the advising and the social justice. Advising is changing. It's morphing. It's not the same as it used to be where you talk to students about classes. It is changing. The kind of questions that I get sometimes in my practice, honestly, I have to go and do research. I had a student who I was advising. She was a perfect 4.0, and she looked at me one day and she said, I've done all the work. You have done everything. I'm an excellent student. Is there anything that I can use to solidify my degree? And she said, you've done everything on your part. I've done everything. Is there anything you can do to set me apart from another student? And I'm sorry, I had no answer. She left me speechless. And that was one time that I had to say, I'll get back to you on that. And I'll tell you where that student is right now. She's at Oxford University in the UK, right? I had to write a letter for her of recommendation, and I just couldn't. I mean, I try to keep those to a page. I ended up with probably about 2 pages. That's a positive things that I had to say about her, and she's a Black female. But asking us sometimes, it's not just about the teaching anymore. We're being asked to do letters of recommendation. We have to tell if a student is the top 10 of their class, if they're in the top 10 of their program. And these are some of the things that we have to do. We have to pay attention to the social justice part of things as well too. It's changing, and what I want to say is you have to keep up with the times. And here's a plug, folks. I want to say to you, remember that the student that you're getting your institution now, they're post 9/11. They're different, right? These are the entitled kind of student that comes into your institution. So you have to be ahead, you have to be a step of them as far as the game is concerned.
Well, we are just about out of time. Thank you so much, Dr. Nibs, for coming and speaking to us today.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Just a reminder, everyone, the next webinar is creating a visibility framework. And also a reminder that one of the 1 o'clock sessions using protective factors to increase student retention is unfortunately canceled, but there are 2 other fantastic sessions that you can attend. If you guys have any other questions, let us know, but we hope that you enjoy the rest of the day. And thank you again, Dr. Nibs.
Thank you, Julie, for being a fantastic facilitator. I appreciate you. Take care, everyone. And please reach out to me. I should have showed you my social media page. You can show the last one, Julie, I think it is. You can connect with me via LinkedIn. I'm on Instagram, I'm on Twitter, and I'm on Facebook.